Flying in high-altitude formations, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress presented a massive exposed underbelly to the skies beneath it. Enemy fighters actively exploited this blind spot, repeatedly attacking from below. The airframe required dedicated defensive firepower angled straight down to close the gap. The engineering solution was the A-2 Sperry ball turret, an external spherical gun emplacement mounted directly to the bottom of the bomber's fuselage. The constraints of mounting an external weapon station to an aerodynamic airframe were severe. The entire unit weighed 850 pounds and measured exactly 44 inches in diameter. That 44-inch diameter dictates an incredibly small internal volume. Inside that roughly 25 cubic feet of space, engineers had to mount two .50 caliber machine guns, thousands of rounds of ammunition, and an automated analog computer. They also had to fit a fully grown human operator in there, alongside the mechanical payload. Understanding how the A-2 functioned requires building it from the ground up. The extreme spatial constraints of this small sphere forced engineers to invent brilliant mechanical workarounds to make the weapon viable. The entire unit anchored to a 46.5-inch hole in the bomber's floor. A slightly larger trunnion ring support assembly sat on this rim to hold the weight. A structural harness bolted to that ring dropped down, joining the turret shell to the airframe. This harness served as the primary conduit for the aircraft's electrical power to reach the rotating sphere below. Standard fixed wiring cannot power a continuously rotating object. The torsional stress eventually causes the cables to twist, bind, and snap. To bypass this, engineers designed a housing at the top filled with brush connectors. Aircraft wiring connected to one side, turret wiring to the other. The brushes rotated smoothly around each other, maintaining continuous electrical contact without any wires twisting. Inside the powered turret, the gunner used a hand control unit situated above their head. The inputs were counterintuitive. Pushing the grips to the left turned the turret right, and pulling the grips elevated the guns. These movements could be combined. The operator could simultaneously pitch and yaw the turret to track fast-moving fighter planes. The movement speed scaled with physical force. Pushing harder on the grips accelerated the motors, allowing the unit to rotate a full 360 degrees in just 8 seconds. Isolating the electrical flow via the brush connectors allowed the A-2 to project a constant 360-degree spear of defensive fire without severing its connection to the ship's main power matrix. The primary armament consisted of two heavy M2 .50 caliber machine guns. These barrels protruded 36 inches from the shell, longer than the B-17's ground clearance. To avoid striking the tarmac, the operator had to crank the guns up to an 85-degree vertical position, flush with the fuselage, before every takeoff and landing. Most gunner stations fed ammunition from large external boxes situated inside the roomy fuselage. The A-2 had to carry its entire payload internally. To maximize every inch of the curved roof, the ammunition bins were built asymmetrically. The right bin held 445 rounds, while the inner left bin held 571. Packed directly beneath these metal bins, the gunner lay locked in a fetal position, their knees drawn to their chest, and their back resting heavily on the bottom curvature of the steel shell. Their feet sat in dual rests directly flanking the central glass sighting window. To fire the guns, the operator had to pull the heavy cocking handles to charge them, but wedged tightly between the bulky receiver mechanisms, the gunner simply had no physical space to reach back and pull the bolts. Engineers installed a dual cable pulley system, steel cables routed from the rear gun assemblies down to two handles by the gunner's feet. The gunner grabbed these handles cross-armed, pulling them toward their chest, letting the pulleys exert tension to yank the bolts backward. The extreme spatial limits of the 44-inch sphere meant that even basic operational functions required complex mechanical linkages just to be executed by a human body. Once sealed inside, the gunner faced severe environmental hazards. The A-2 was entirely unpressurized and possessed no insulation against the high-altitude air. Internal temperatures frequently plummeted to -50 degrees Fahrenheit. If bare skin touched the interior metal, it froze to it instantly, forcing gunners to wear thick, electrically heated flight suits. Life support systems faced a similar hurdle. A standard oxygen hose attached to a turret spinning multiple times during combat would tangle and eventually rupture. The solution was complete biological isolation. The turret utilized an independent, pressurized oxygen bottle attached to the rotating harness above, feeding a single, short hose downward to the operator. This localized system constrained the gunner to a strict 2-hour supply of oxygen. To keep the operator alive during an 8-hour mission, the waist gunner had to manually swap out these oxygen bottles mid-flight from up inside the main fuselage. The intense spatial packaging also left zero room for bodily relief systems. Locked inside for hours on end, many gunners resorted to drilling holes in a side plexiglass window and feeding a rubber siphon tube through it. The rigid mechanical requirement for continuous rotation completely severed the gunner's physical and biological connection to the rest of the bomber crew. Targeting was handled by the Sperry K4 automatic computing gun sight. This shoebox-sized device accounted for 25% of the turret's $250,000 equivalent cost. The optical sighting head hung from the roof of the unit, positioned directly in the gunner's eyeline above the main central window. Using a mechanical pedal under their left foot, the operator physically zoomed the optical reticle in and out to perfectly frame the incoming target. This active framing fed data directly into the analog computer, which instantly calculated gravity drop, wind speed, and target trajectory to generate an accurate fire control solution. But an automated, highly lethal turret mounted directly beneath 4 spinning aircraft propellers created a massive risk of catastrophic friendly fire. To prevent this, engineers installed a physical safeguard. A contoured cam mirrored the downward arcs of the propellers. When guns rotated toward a prop, a pin struck this cam, breaking the circuit and cutting power. Clearing the arc, the pin dropped and the guns rearmed. The only blind spot in this cam profile was the bomb bay. It did not account for the doors extending outward during a bombing run, meaning a gunner could easily shoot their own aircraft if they fired while dropping a payload. The K4 computer and physical cam network allowed the A2 to function as a precision, self-regulating weapon system. Due to its extreme isolation and claustrophobic design, the ball turret is heavily misunderstood as a vulnerable suicide trap. In reality, the gunner sat inside a fortified shell. The seat base utilized 0.6-inch thick steel armor, and the curved backrest was formed from 0.26-inch thick steel, engineered to stop .30 caliber rounds and deflect flak. This chart shows the casualty percentages across B-17 crew stations as surveyed by the 8th Air Force for returning aircraft. It demonstrates that ball turret gunners actually suffered the lowest casualty rate of any crew position, sitting at just 6%. The tight packaging created excellent component shielding. The gunner's body was wedged so deeply between the thick steel gun receivers, the overhead ammunition bins, and the K4 sight that the machinery itself acted as secondary armor against incoming shrapnel. If the bomber's landing gear failed, a belly landing would crush the protruding lower sphere. To survive this specific scenario, the ball turret gunner had one final emergency procedure, jettisoning the entire turret mid-flight. By removing 12 connecting nuts from the harness legs and violently smashing 4 safety-retaining hooks with a hammer, the crew could completely detach the mounting assembly and drop the 850-pound turret into the sky. The A2 Sperry ball turret was an exercise in rigorous physical compromise. By packing heavily fortified firepower and analog computation into a 44-inch footprint, engineers achieved 360-degree lethality without sacrificing the operator inside.